freedom is not free. Discover what it takes. It's time to tap and move forward.
Hello and welcome to Tap and Move Forward. I'm your host, Lynn Shelley. Today's guest went to the Air Force Academy because he didn't want to pay for college. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but he learned to dig deep, and he found out what it took to complete the academy, graduating in 2016. His first assignment was to Kadena, Japan, where he decided to start his own YouTube channel. He has loads of information-packed videos on officer and military life. Just search his name, Alex Tsang, or click the link in the show notes. For today's skill set challenge, one of the things Alex talks about is getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. If you're not ready to start an uncomfortable conversation, start researching how to navigate difficult conversations, maybe using crucial conversations or nonviolent communication as guidelines. And if you have some skills that way already, start working on your skill set by seeking out some difficult conversations. Without further delay, here's the interview with Alex Tsang. Why did you join the military and how old were you?
So I joined the military right out of the high school. So I was 17 at the time. So I entered basic training at 17 years old. I joined the military basically on a whim, and the only reason I joined was because of the free college. I went to the Air Force Academy straight out of high school. And the only reason I found out about the Air Force Academy is through coincidence, where I went to a college fair in my high school. And in this college fair, I was going up and down the aisles with my dad, and the recruiter for the Air Force Academy, out of all the other military academies, Naval, West Point, the Army, and also the Merchant Marines were all there. The only recruiter that came up to me was the Air Force Academy, and he mentioned something along the lines of, do you want to go to school for free and you want to get paid for it? And I said, hell yeah, let's do it. And so he explained basically the whole concept of what this military academy is and what the Air Force Academy does, and he gave us a pamphlet with all the information of the usual candidates of how their resume looks like. And it seems pretty high up there, and I definitely fell below the average of what the Air Force Academy accepted. But I heard that the application was free. So every application for college is basically $50 to $60, and I didn't want to pay another $60 for a school that I'm probably not going to get into. Ended up, I applied to it and I got in. Long story short, with the application process, it was super long, and I didn't even know what I was getting myself into. Eventually, I just kept on pushing through it, and got to the point where I had my interview, and I actually thought I screwed up the interview because they asked me about the core values of the Air Force, which is, one of them is to integrity first. And the Air Force Academy is very big with the honor code and about lying and cheating and all this stuff. And he gave me the scenario of, if my best friend was about to fail a class and we both had the same class, and I took the test first, I knew exactly what was on the test, would I be willing to help him out and basically cheat? And I said yes, and I explained why that I did it is because he's my best friend. I don't want him to get kicked out of the Air Force Academy. Like, it's pointless to go through an experience and not share it with somebody else. That's important. So got to the point where I basically said yes, I'm be willing to cheat. And at the end of the interview, he mentioned not like taking any notes or anything. He said, like, you should relook on your values with yourself and with the integrity stuff, because it doesn't align a lot with the Air Force. But so that gave me the notion that I probably screwed up the interview, and my dad heard it as well. And he's like, man, you shouldn't have said that. Like, that's too honest right there. And that's when I thought I screwed it up, and eventually I got an acceptance letter. So
that's really interesting. It's almost ironic though, because your dad's saying that's too honest. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you had more integrity in being honest about your perspectives
Right.
than giving them whatever they wanted to hear.
Yeah, I had the same experience with wanting what they want to, saying what they want to hear in the academy, because they asked me why I joined, the same question that you're asking me, and the answer they wanted was, or a lot of people gave, was because they want to serve their country. And that wasn't true, because the main reason I joined was because of free college, and I was going to get paid for it. Like, if that wasn't part of the deal, I wouldn't do it. You know, it's kind of not. There's a perspective that it could be taken that it's selfish, but at the same time, it's like the military kind of advertises that. Like that was the opening line for the recruiter. So it actually made a video about this where they basically told me that I wasn't going to graduate because I was having too much of a materialistic view of joining the military. They said I was not going to be successful and stuff, but eventually, yeah, I graduated. So joke's on them, I guess. So yeah, I guess that's like a side story of what you asked.
So I would imagine that and you even mentioned this, that it's quite difficult to get in to the Air Force Academy. How high are their standards? So
when I applied in 2012, they had an acceptance rate of, I think, 12 to 13%. This takes into account with senator's nomination or congressman nomination, whatever, basically a government nomination that takes into account. Basically, certain senators and certain congressmen could only give out so many nominations. I think besides that, there is the ACT. ACT's average is 31, and I had a 28. And the GPA was around a 3.9 to 4.0. I had a 3.3 to 3.5, I don't remember. So totally below average what a candidate would will look like. So yeah, that's where even the first minute I saw the pamphlet, I was giving myself very low expectations of ever getting into this school.
But then you did get in.
Yeah, I got in. I don't know how. I think I applied at a region. I'm originally from Chicago, the south side of Chicago, inner city. So not a lot of people knew about the academy or any of the military academies. If it wasn't for coincidence and that recruiter coming up to me and basically telling me about free school, I wouldn't have never applied or known about the opportunity. So that's how well known it was. The opportunity wasn't out there. The message was not out there. It was not marketed out to my community and also the school in general that I went to.
Once you made it to the academy and you showed up there your first day or your first week that you're there, was there a moment of astonishment or kind of surprise as far as what you had gotten yourself into? Yeah,
definitely. The recruiter never gave me a warning. He kind of said the academy is hard, and his son was going through it, and that's all he said. So I was just like, I don't know what hard means in this context, you know. Like when I was going through high school, I had sports, and after sports, I would eat dinner, and by the time I'm finishing dinner at 8 o'clock, I would be going through my studies, like studying until like 10 o'clock, 11, and then wake up at 5:30 to go through practice again, you know. So that was pretty hard for me. So I don't know what the hell he was talking about in terms of what hard means. And the first day, I remember the first day of basic training is like, we're all getting yelled at, and I don't have any military history. I have no military knowledge. I not regret it, but I thought to myself, what did I get myself into? I remember trying to go to sleep and just staring at the ceiling. I couldn't fall asleep because I was so stressed out. And eventually, I kind of questioned myself throughout basic training, cried a few times, re-looked at what I really wanted to do, and I just like pushed through it, you know, grinded it out, and it worked out pretty well.
So was there a transition there as far as the way that you looked at why you joined? Because if you're just doing it for getting school paid, was that a value that was great enough to carry you through that stress? Or did you kind of rethink that?
I don't want to say that it was all driven by school, or free school, should I say. I think another factor that I took into consideration is I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was decent at school, and I wasn't like a professional athlete or anything, but I got to the point where I worked up where I was not too bad in the physical terms, but I just didn't know what direction I wanted in my life. And I knew that the military had some kind of structure, like in all the Hollywood movies and every single thing about the military that's broadcasted out in the media. Everybody has structure in the military. Every path is kind of like paved out, and it gave me a sense of, I won't say reliability, but a sense of security, that I knew that if I graduated from this school, I would have a job. I knew that I wouldn't have debt, so it made me worry-free in that case.
Okay, good. So it became a lot more about the security, the bigger picture of what it could do for your future in your life.
Right.
And honestly, and you mentioned this before too as well, you said that it may seem like it's a selfish reason, but honestly, I think whatever reason we find that motivates us on some level is selfish. Even if it is to serve our country, there's a piece of us that wants to know the honor of serving, or that wants to enliven a piece in ourselves that is the warrior. Like that type of drive, it's more to know something inside of ourselves. And there's a selfish aspect in anybody's reason for joining. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. We have a first row seat on our own perspective in our own life, and the way that we navigate that is making the decision we think is best for us, no matter what it is. So you could always say for any decision that there's an element of selfishness in it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It wasn't until recently where I thought about that, like giving people who give to charity, honestly give to charity and give out money, they're actually doing it for selfish reasons in terms of it gives them a dopamine hit every time they give something out. Even though it's kind of like the act of giving something in itself gives it back to oneself. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, where it's just like you get a reward out of it, otherwise you wouldn't do it.
Right. There is a value no matter what. Absolutely. So what was a normal day like at the academy?
Depends on the year. Let's go with freshman year, which everybody's the biggest barrier for a lot of people. Freshman year, woke up at 5:30 or 5, and you have to be out at the hallways by 6 o'clock in uniform, standing at attention, staring at a wall, and start basically based on the leadership of that squadron. You would have to memorize, I think they're called minutes. I don't even remember anymore. It's basically the menu for the whole day. So your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, what type of day it is. There's usually M days and T days. The academics is split into 2 days to have a little bit more organization. And also, I think there's a quote or something. There's a quote, and you always had to have like a recent news article memorized of what's going on in the world. So any upperclassman could ask you basically what's in the news today, and then you will basically spew out whatever article you have in your mind or you memorized.
Interesting.
Yeah. After that, during my freshman year, we had mandatory breakfast. So we had to be at the dining hall, which is Mitchell Hall at the Air Force Academy, at 6:30, 6:45. There are certain days where we had morning formation. Basically, we just stand out there and wait until the flag, it's not retreat, reveille. They wait until reveille gets played, and then we march towards the dining hall. Then we have mandatory breakfast, and during breakfast and any meal, as an unrecognized freshman, I'll get into what recognition is and recognized and non-recognized. As a unrecognized freshman is you have to sit at attention and basically eat at attention. So you kind of like basic training. You take a spoonful of food, put it in your mouth, chew it, and put your utensils down. You can't eat. You eat like a robot, essentially. And that's like basically all the meals except for dinner time. Then you go to class by, I think, 7:30 or 8 o'clock, depending on your schedule. At 11, we have noon formation, which is basically a repeat of standing at attention again out at the campus. They call it the terrazzo. And basically report in with all these marching stuffs, a lot of drills and ceremonies, related things, and then we march towards lunch for mandatory lunch, and then go through class again. Classes start up at 1 o'clock, all the way until 3:30 or 4. And depending on the day, we have, if you're not an athlete, then we have intramurals at a certain, intramurals is like sports, basically mandatory sports that you have to go through for like an hour or two. And then from then on, your day is relatively free. So probably by around 5:30 or 6, it's when you start having your free time. But as a freshman, it gets restricted because there's a lot of factors that come into play. There's so many obligations where it's like some athletes literally have to wake up by like 4 o'clock to get to like morning practice and stuff. And by morning practice, they eat and have to be at class by 7:30, 8 o'clock, straight 4 classes all the way until 12 o'clock. They go back to practice, and then they do their homework at like 6 o'clock all the way to midnight. That's like I guess that's like the essential times a day. Just split everything by meals, and in between meals are usually classes or mandatory lectures, mandatory what are they called? Intramurals, yeah. And there, as a freshman, you also have training sessions where the upperclassman trains you by doing exercises, like bodyweight exercises, and you do that for like an hour or two. And during that time, also, it's weird. I'm like going down in a lot of rabbit holes right now. Training sessions, like you memorize quotes and you kind of just shout them out, like in basic training. It's essentially an hour of basic training again, where you're doing exercises, saying quotes, standing at attention, sweating, hungry, and dehydrated. And then afterwards, you get back to your schooling and go to dinner.
Did they assign the quotes to you?
They do. We have a thing called the contrails. It's like this little, for us, our class color was blue. I graduated in 2016, so our class color was blue, so we had blue contrails, had basically a lot of information about the Air Force. We have to memorize, something that we would have to memorize is Schofield's quote, and anybody, I just don't know what it was for. Maybe it was a commencement speech, but it basically took you 2 minutes to recite the whole thing. And sometimes an example would be like you're in a front-leaning rest, like in a push-up position, and you're saying this quote, and if you screw it up, you basically add on another 2 minutes because you have to say the quote correctly. You correct yourself. Besides quotes that we memorized, there are like aircraft that are manufactured. We got to know what manufacturer that created this aircraft, how many were produced, how many are active right now, and the role it plays in the warfighter. So a helicopter might do something different than a a fighter jet at F-16.
Right.
So those little details, I guess the purpose was to have attention to detail and just memorizing every single little thing and get tested by it at any time.
Interesting. Were the quotes things that you found helpful or that you find helpful now? Or was it just another thing you had to do?
I don't know. I think it probably did, but to me, if I'm looking back on it, probably not. Inherently it did, probably.
Yeah.
It probably connected some neurons in my brain to like help me memorize certain things and pick up certain skills of basically memorizing something that's relatively mundane. And
they weren't inspirational quotes?
They probably were at the time. I just don't remember it for it to become inspirational
so they weren't
right now.
Inspirational for you, whatever the case was.
Right. It was just definitely for me. I wasn't exactly the best cadet, and I just memorized it for the sake of memorizing and not getting in trouble, not because I was motivating. So.
How did you deal with the stress?
Stress. Let's see. Freshman year, I didn't take it well. I actually ended up I got on academic probation, so that's when your GPA falls below 2.0, I think, and 2.0 is pretty low for a lot of schools, and so it fell below 2.0. I never failed a class, but I got a lot of D's as a freshman, and I really didn't know how to cope with that because even though I passed it, I felt like I was failing in a sense, like I wasn't getting accustomed to the lifestyle as quickly as my peers. And I didn't really know how to deal with that except just to work out and go move forward, grind it out. Like that, I feel like that's a lot of aspects in my life where even in high school, I'm not talented in any single way. Like it took me a while for me to be decent at a certain thing, for like sports, for academics. I know that if I work hard on it, I'll get decent at it. After I put like 1,000 hours, 10,000 hours, whatever it was, nothing really clicked in my head besides video games, where I became naturally talented. But everything else in my life, I've noticed that it had to be a grinder in order for it to be successful.
I really love that though, because I don't think people talk enough about kind of having the patience and the perseverance to see something through, because it can be, especially if you come up against something that seems really difficult, it can be very easy to just be like, well, I'll go try something else.
Right.
Instead of having a little bit more foresight and going, it'll pay off in the long run. I'll get there even if I'm not there yet.
Right.
And just keep at it until you know that you'll get there.
Yeah, I think something that really helped me out was knowing there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I know there's a lot of things in our lives and in everybody's lives, there might not be an end for some point. But in this case, where the academy, I knew that after freshman year, after I get recognized, life would be a lot easier. No one's going to be yelling at me. I don't have to stand at attention 24/7. I don't have to wear all military clothing. I get to have civilian clothes now. My life gets exponentially easier. And I also thought about, I guess, I was either too lazy to apply to another school to get transferred, because I thought to myself, it's going to be a lot more work to just go to another school right now. Like, I'd rather just stick it out or just have them kick me out at a certain point. So that was kind of like my mindset. And two, I talked to my mom about it after first semester, where I was taking finals and I was like questioning, like, I'm barely passing calculus. like I have a D right now, and if I get anything below a D in my final, I'm gonna get an F, and then I'm gonna end up being this academic board, basically, where basically leadership reviews my grades and basically not questions, but interviews me on why I would want to stay at the academy. So I didn't want to go through that. So there was kind of this limbo of being too lazy to apply to another school, and also just not being smart enough to accomplish my grades. So it came to the point where I just hoped for the best and tried my best, and at the end, I think it kind of worked out.
So do you get to choose what area of study you have?
Not
Air Force Academy?
We do. We have majors. The majors are pretty limited. There's not a lot of. There are liberal arts majors. I'm a management major with a minor in Chinese, but they're like, for example, I said a minor in Chinese because I wanted to double major. I wanted a Chinese major as well with my management, but the academy doesn't have a language major program. So a lot of STEM classes. So STEM is like engineering, mathematics, aerospace engineering, aeronautical engineering, civil engineering. A lot of these science-based majors that even though the Air Force is more like towards technology and towards like the sciences and stuff, a very technical type of military, it's kind of surprising because I think more than half the cadets are not STEM majors. So it's like any type of college, really. It's just the core curriculum is pretty tough because every single cadet has to take engineering class every single year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I had to take astronautical and aeronautical engineering as a junior and senior. I also took mechanical engineering in sophomore. And I took like an intro class as a freshman.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so if you fail a core class, that's not good. You can't graduate. So that's like, I guess the difficult part of the academy is mainly the academics. It's what gets most cadets kicked out.
When you look back on your experience now, is it something you're really proud of?
Yes, definitely. I always get the question of if I have the knowledge right now I have about the academy, would I go back in? The answer is no, because there's a lot easier way to become an officer than through the Air Force Academy. The ROTC is by far probably the easiest way and quickest way to become an Air Force officer. But I think if I didn't know anything about the Air Force Academy, like it's a blank slate, I would have still done the Air Force Academy if I had the opportunity to choose between ROTC and the Air Force Academy, mainly because I was curious enough to wonder about what military life is like. And the Air Force Academy is like kind of like the premier institution for Air Force officers.
Right.
They advertise like this is literally generals are breeded by this institution, and that's like the main purpose when it was first created was just to create the best officers they can. And so to compare it to an ROTC thing, if I didn't have any knowledge between those two, I would definitely would have chosen the Air Force Academy. And even if I have the knowledge right now, I don't ever regret joining through the Air Force Academy because I've gotten so many close friends from it. You know, everybody would say this from what I've heard, any smart person would say this, is that it's not really the institution that makes the experience good. It's more about the people that you meet and the experiences that you share with them rather than the prestigious whatever fame that this institution has granted the past years.
I talk a lot about that just in the military in general, because you have to go different places for training, or if you deploy or whatever the case may be, and you end up meeting people from all over. And it's one of the big benefits of the military is the people that you meet.
Right, definitely.
Along the way. Yep. Are there habits that you learned from the academy that you still use or that you find valuable for your career?
Yeah, I guess working during your free time, whenever you free time that I have, like time management, I think that's the best word to put it. I had like free periods in between classes. So that I would have a class, 45 minutes of free period, and then class again. So in between that free period, we're free to do whatever I want. I could go back to my room and take like a 20-minute nap, but it literally takes me 10 to 20 minutes to walk back to my room. So I will lose 20 minutes walking. So in my head, to use the most amount of time as efficiently as possible, I'd rather just go to the library, kick out, do some homework. So at the end of the day, I would probably have like 1 or 2 things to do rather than 5 things. It's just literally taking every snippet of time that you have for free and use it towards something productive. And I think I don't want to get into like more like getting away from or staying away from trouble. So I'm not going to go into that because there's definitely,
I'm curious.
Because like there's so many things you get in trouble for at the academy. There's so many rules.
Okay.
There's so many red tape.
Sure.
Like if you don't attend a mandatory lecture that you are totally not interested about, but as a class you are required to do so because so and so said so, and you're basically caught, like you get in trouble for it, for whatever it is. You could get, they call it demerits. It's basically something they put on your record that's saying like if you get over 100 demerits in a semester, then you could get kicked out. So I got basically good enough to avoid getting in trouble. I definitely didn't attend all the lectures I needed to or wanted to. So it's just like, I guess in my head, when I decided to skip out on mandatory things that I thought were stupid, I thought to myself, like, is this like actually necessary for me to become a good person or a good leader? And to a certain extent, there are pros and cons. Basically, it's like, yeah, I'm skipping out on something. That means I don't have the integrity to do so, to like follow rules and stuff and do all this. But at the same time, in my head, as a personal, in like my personality, it's not efficient. Like I'm literally wasting an hour of my time, and I'm probably gonna fall asleep in this thing. So attending this thing is the only purpose that serves is just to not get in trouble. It's not because I'm gonna learn something out of it. So I rather skip something and use that time to like do homework or something, rather than to sit there and try not to fall asleep.
I would make the assumption that your ability to do that makes you more engaging as an officer and would make you a lot easier for people to deal with. Like your willingness to see people as people, because I think one of the stereotypes with enlisted versus officers is that officers don't treat, or they're too much into management or their authority, that they don't treat the enlisted like they're people. But I would imagine it makes you a better leader that you had a natural capacity to see through what's really important in this situation and how do I take care of my people.
Yeah, I think it's in my experience, at least, I'm probably more empathetic than a lot of my coworkers that I have worked with, even enlisted and officers. It's just, for me, like I tend to fight back towards a very harsh punishment, mainly because if I was in their shoes, I probably would do the same thing. Like 90% of the time, that if it's not something extremely stupid, I understood why they would have done something a certain way. And it's even to the point where I had to like argue for a person, even though they may have a bad reputation in the past. It doesn't necessarily matter about their reputation in the past, because in this case, in this certain scenario, it doesn't seem like it didn't fall back into their bad habits. It's more like they chose to do this because they thought it was the right thing to do. It wasn't because they maliciously acted on to do something negative.
I think that in the vast majority of times, people aren't doing things to be malicious.
Yeah.
I think it's just people being people and dealing with their own past and their own internal turmoil. They're trying to do the best that they can.
Right, yeah.
But unfortunately, sometimes unfortunately, it can come out in ways that are very destructive. And then I've heard that officers are the ones that really have to do a lot of the work around that when it happens inside the constructs of the military, at least. If someone's quote unquote behaved improperly, that's your job to
right, yeah,
to handle that.
That's definitely and I think any commander would say this is probably the worst part of the job, is to basically hash out punishment and give out punishment. It's because you don't want to do that to that person, but at the same time, like, they did it, you know, like they did something wrong, and you kind of have to set the example and keep good order and discipline is what the phrase word and buzzword that a lot of people would use.
Well, it makes sense. Like, if you just ignore something, then it can just fester and grow and become stronger. Like, the more you don't look at it, the more that it can become even more obvious. So it's important to be able to confront situations like that. It's just tricky and difficult.
It's a lot easier to have, like, I've learned this for the past years, just learning through my job where I had to have uncomfortable conversations.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to do that with friends and family now, because I'm able to do that at work.
Oh, so now you can do it a lot easier with friends and family.
Yep, definitely. Just because I'm not afraid to do it anymore. And for friends and family, it's never like a position issue. Like, here at the military, it's like you kind of have the duty to do so, and it's kind of your responsibility to set the example, and you are responsible as the commander or as an officer to keep everything together. But as, like, friends and family, you kind of sometimes have to call people out on their bullshit, you know?
Right.
You have to set them straight. It's like, I'm doing this because I love you, and I appreciate you being as my friend or my family member, but you gotta cut this out because it's kind of stupid that you're doing this. And you explain the situation and be a little bit more empathetic, because everything kind of like correlates together, you know?
Sure. And what a great skill set.
Right.
Just for life in general. And it's funny because I never necessarily thought of it as a skill set that way. I mean, I've thought of having good communication as an important skill set, but not necessarily how comfortable you are with bringing up the difficult aspects of a relationship.
And I think a lot of people should start doing that, because it kind of creates some kind of vulnerability with people. And I think the best way to basically have uncomfortable conversations to relate to past experience that you personally had, and say, like, I would have done something like this too because this and this happened a few years ago, or whatever it is. And it kind of opens up the conversation of the person explaining why they did such a thing. You know, it's kind of weird how, like, if you are vulnerable yourself, people kind of reciprocate. I'm pretty sure there's like some kind of law or some theory out there that smart people created, that once you do something, the other person is probably more than likely reciprocate similarly.
Yes, absolutely.
Learned that at the academy too, through school.
Really?
Yeah.
That vulnerability inspires vulnerability?
No, the reciprocity, is that a word?
Reciprocity?
Yeah, that word. I learned that through, I think through a friend that took a different course than I did, but we were in the same major.
Oh, okay.
And he just, like, talked about it, because what was the story? I think we were buying other people's drinks at a bar one time, and he had a friend that was a female that he bought a drink for, and she returned a favor for it. And then he brought up the idea that he learned from our management courses. It's like, oh, this is this thing. I'm like, what? There's a thing that there's a name for it? And so that's, I don't know, snippet of knowledge, I guess.
So if you could go back to yourself as a young freshman, is there any advice that you would give yourself? Like, if you now could visit you back then and just give yourself a piece of advice?
Everything is going to be okay. Like, I thought the world was going to end when my academics were not that good, when it was like below 2.0. It eventually worked itself out, because the classes, I'm not sure if the classes got easier or I just got used to the studying. But it got to the point where I was always constantly worrying about things. And there's so many little things I was worrying about, especially with the academy. There's so many obligations that certain obligations are not that important. And you could get away with a lot of things as a freshman, and just being a person in general. You could get away with a lot of things with the many obligations that they kind of tack on to you. And life gets exponentially better after recognition, which was basically the last few days of before spring break, is basically where all the upperclassmen not gangs up on the freshman class, but it's like the last 3 days for them to be able to train the freshmen. And I'm doing air quotes, like train the freshmen. So this last 3 days is like an intensified basic training times 1,000. So you're waking up like 3:30 in the morning and you go to bed by 11. So you kind of feed off like 4 hours of sleep for the past for 3 days, and you're constantly getting yelled at. Everything is go, go, go. Like you don't have academics. They literally shut down a Thursday and a Friday for no academics, and literally not 24/7, but like 20 hours out of each day you're getting yelled at. And it's the last time that upperclassmen are able to do this. So it becomes where like four versus one. The ratio is like 4-1, where you're getting 4 people yelling at you and doing whatever. And it's like, I guess, extremely stressful, but it goes by so quickly that afterwards you kind of reap the reward. Because I remember the feeling of on Saturday when we finish everything, everybody kind of celebrates. Like the whole culture of the academy, everybody shifts towards not being so strict and strenuous, and everybody's relaxed a lot of times. It kind of feels like normal college. Like I don't know what that feels like, but it felt like that. You know?
As far as you know.
Yeah. So as far as I know, yeah, it's like normal college after recognition, and the weather gets better. Like literally everything kind of gets better, and it feels a lot rewarding, very rewarding afterwards. So basically, don't quit after if I was to tell myself, don't quit after first semester.
If you were meeting someone who was going in, would you give them different advice?
No, not at all. It's funny because I have a YouTube channel, I have gotten freshman cadets that would DM me on Instagram, asking for advice for like, I really don't like being here, and I saw your video about like joining the school because of free college and stuff, and I'm in the same boat. I want to quit, and this is literally a month or two ago where recognition was about to happen. This kid was messaging me basically asking for advice. I'm like, dude, it gets a lot better. Like it's only 3 freaking days. Like that's it. Like if you think about the grand scheme of things, it's literally 3 days, and you're getting stressed out about something it's not too stressing. You know, you just kind of go with the flow, and it's going to happen. So if it's not going to happen, that means you quit, and you don't know what life is going to be like. And you could always make the decision after your sophomore year, because that's after sophomore year is when cadets have to commit, and that's when you basically tack on to this contract saying that if you get kicked out of the academy or quit after your junior year, then you have to pay a certain amount back to the government. So it's short amount of time with what people think they're experiencing.
I love that you bring up too, you said that if you quit, you won't know what it's like.
Right.
And I think about the scene from The Matrix where they're in the car and they pull out this weird contraption because they're going to pull the bug out of him. Oh. And he starts freaking out, like, let me out of here. Like, and he opens the door to get out of the car, and Trinity's like, you know what's down that road. Like you already know what's down there.
Right.
Like quitting, you're just going back to your same space that you've always been in, but you never know what there could be or what could open up for you, what opportunities, what piece of yourself that maybe you aren't aware of that can open up if you just keep going through and figure out what's going on with the weird contraption that sucks the bug out of your stomach.
Just to feed off of that with going down like that same route or basically going back to that same route or moving forward and just pushing past the grind. I think a lot of people I haven't figured this out myself. I think it's just like once you choose to keep on going down that path of keep on grinding it out, at what point do you stop grinding? You know, at what point do you kind of give up and just like let it go? And in terms of the context of the academy, I feel like there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. So that's where there's a goal in mind, but in terms of life in general, where it's like nobody knows exactly what they want to do until something happens in the present. You know, it's kind of weird to think about where it's like there's always opportunity out there, but you don't know what the opportunity is until you actually reach the opportunity. It's kind of weird to think about, but that's.
No, I love that you say it that way because I think a lot of people think they're supposed to just know.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe there are some people out there who do have like this just knowing that they're born with, that they know what they're going to be and do.
Right.
But I think it's far more common what you're saying. It's like you have to put yourself out there in different situations and be in discovery before you actually find out what that situation is.
And I think it's important to also know how to pivot. You know, there's a certain point where you're going to be bored of it. Like you're going to be so good at something that you're just like, all right, so what's next? You know, like the question is always like, what's next? Am I going to keep doing this stuff? And am I excited to do this stuff? And also like, is there an end goal? You don't necessarily have to have like an end goal or end game, but at a certain point you kind of have to know. I guess, I don't know, it's kind of contradicting myself now that I'm thinking about it, because you kind of know what the general concept of life that you want to have. Like you want to own this certain thing or have some kind of fulfillment in your life or just have like the certain feeling that you want to accomplish. And you could do that with so many other things in life. You don't have to always stick to something that's right in front of you. You could always pivot to something else. And sticking onto one thing does not necessarily mean that you have to stick to it for the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah. Right. Good. And I think too, I mean, you've talked about the grind quite a bit and your willingness and ability to stay in the fight. But one of the pieces of that I want to bring up is that there's a calmness not only in your demeanor but in the way that you talk about it that suggests that your ability to stay there also has to deal with your ability to embrace the situation for what it is instead of fighting against it or wishing it was different. So I know for myself and past experiences, you can make things way more stressful and a lot more difficult if you're fighting yourself or you're fighting the situation, trying to push it away, like I don't want this in my life, I don't want this. And then it makes it so much harder to stay in the fight or to stay in the grind, as you call it, instead of being really able to lean into the stress, the grind, the difficulty of the situation, which requires a space of allowance for how difficult it is. Not that it means you liked it anymore.
Right. I think a good way that now I'm thinking about it is just like putting myself at a third person perspective. Just
really?
Just to step a little bit back and saying like, what else am I going to do? You know, like what are my other options and what what am I willing to give up and what I'm not willing to give up. And I think that's a very important aspect, or different types of aspects to think about, because there might be, like, I guess, a benefit of a certain thing that's super shiny. Like for me, I guess I'll go back with the academy. When I was trying to decide whether to stay in or not, the one thing that was really making me think about quitting was because I saw everybody on social media with all my friends partying as a freshman in college, like living their life and enjoying themselves. They all seem happy, and I'm here like miserable, struggling with school, complete different opposite spectrum. And I think about it, whereas like, what is their life going to be like in 3-4 years? Like, are they going to be struggling to find a job and stuff? Are they going to be struggling with student debt? Like, I don't know what that's going to be like if I stay in this route. And so just knowing that there's a reward that's worth working for, that's what made me keep on going. Because even if there's a slight chance of me succeeding, I think the reward is so worth it, because that slight chance could, if it all works out, then it's going to be great. And it did. So it worked out at the end where I don't own any student debt, and I'm comparing. I don't like comparing to myself with other people, and I don't recommend anybody else comparing to themselves with other people. But with my peers and stuff, we basically make the same amount of money, except they have to pay thousands of dollars of student debt. I don't have to do that. And so even though we're making the same amount of money, they're living at a more frugal lifestyle than I would be living.
I want to add on to your story. It's kind of a smaller version of the concept I think you're talking about, but I work with the new recruits, and we were running on a weekend, right? It was drill weekend, and I was running with one in particular. She was struggling. She was not happy about being out there running. And my first attempt was to get her to a more positive place, but she was very stubborn that she did not want to be positive about the situation. So I was like, okay, well then embrace it. Like, what else could you be doing right now? You'd be laying at home in bed. Like, you chose to do something more with your life. You chose to be something greater.
Yeah.
Most of your friends probably are laying in bed, but you're doing something else. You're on a weekend out running. Mm-hmm. And that got her more excited and able to lean in, because it's like, yeah, I'm doing something that sucks.
Yeah.
I'm choosing to do it. Yeah. But like, there's a pride that can come from that, because there's more because of the reward.
Uh-huh. And I think that like brought me to this kind of famous Navy SEAL now, former Navy SEAL, David Goggins. I'm not sure.
I love David Goggins.
Yeah, he loves talking about embracing the suck, because you can learn so much from it. Because if you experience something really shitty right now, you know that in a future time when you could rely back on that experience of, I know I went through something shitty and this is probably not as bad as what it felt like previously. He's kind of putting into perspective of your past experience could help you push towards your future and future experiences of embracing the shitty parts in life and knowing that you could probably do this because you have done it before.
Yeah, I love that he talks about that, and that you're bringing it up. It's basically like having an arsenal of emotional support for yourself based on past things you've done. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a lot, then you gotta get yourself out there more.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up your YouTube channel as well, because you started it while you were in the military, right?
Yes.
What inspired you to start your YouTube channel?
I was sitting at home after work every single day, basically the first 2 months of my job once I got to Japan. And I was watching Netflix and watching a lot of YouTube videos, and I felt like I was wasting my life away. And I didn't want to get a master's degree. So right now I don't have a master's degree, and a lot of people have told me and advised me to get my master's degree right as I graduated. But I was just like, school is not for me. Like, I struggle with school. If I have to go through this, I'll probably hate my life. So I don't want to do that. And I guess one day I was watching this YouTuber called Christian Guzman. He owns his own business. He dropped out of college, started his own clothing line called Alphalete, and he started like a coaching business for fitness, and he created his own gym. So he's basically a 25-year-old multi-millionaire, and it all started from YouTube, because at that time when YouTube first emerged, it was very the fishes in the bowl for fitness was very small, and so he was kind of like one of the pioneers for it. And I thought to myself, like, I could do YouTube videos. Like, I like editing. I've had experience with video editing. I have a camera which is my phone, so I could do this myself. So I started doing stuff that was originally towards fitness, because I wanted to become like Christian Guzman. Like, I wanted to be as successful as he is, and he likes his life, and I'm able to basically create my own business and have not power, but have the opportunity to basically make any decisions, and it will happen because it's my business. It's my own baby. I could do whatever I want with it. So I created this YouTube channel towards fitness, and eventually came to the point where I was producing a couple of videos. It didn't do too well. No one was watching unless I posted on my personal Facebook Facebook page. And then I created a video about like a daily vlog, or not daily vlog, but a vlog of day in the life of a U.S. Air Force officer. And it got the most amount of views and engagement I've ever gotten with my YouTube channel. And that kind of sparked an idea of, like, why was it so interesting? Like, I was just living my life, and I filmed like a couple of things that wasn't even necessarily related to my job. It was just kind of like me going through my day in my uniform. I went to like I'm not even sure what I did. I went to like the grocery store in my uniform, and that was like interesting to some people. I'm like, this is kind of stupid, but I mean, people liked it, and people started asking questions in the comments of, oh, what do you do? Like, how do you get to this? And like, I'm interested in joining. Like, what should I do with this and that? And I was just like, isn't there like anybody else like answering this? So I searched up U.S. Air Force officer on the search bar of YouTube, and no one really popped up. There was like maybe one or two videos, like. And I clicked on their channels, and they're not consistently producing content. So I basically thought of the idea of, why won't I just do it? And so it became more and more of a military channel, and eventually branched off to where right now I'm producing one video a week, and that's my goal, at least, and to keep it in relation towards my life and also the military as well, to give a little bit of general information, and also the typical day and basically candid moments of my life. So I'm not like a robot speaking out information.
So how do any listeners find you?
They could search up my name, Alex Tsang, Alextsang. I think I'm like the only Air Force officer producing YouTube videos right now. That's consistent, at least from what I've seen. You could also find me on Instagram if you just Google my name as well. My Instagram is more towards fitness, so that's kind of how I branched the two platforms. But fitness is definitely one of my biggest passions, so that's why I want to keep that around.
What aspects of fitness are really most exciting to you?
The progression piece. I'm not sure if I want to go back all the way to when I was a grade schooler, because, well, to keep it very short, in grade school, 8th grade, I was a fat little kid. I was like I had a 36-inch waist, and I had a crush on this girl, and but she didn't like me back, and I had a feeling it's because of my weight and me being chubby, and she liked this dude he literally had a six-pack in 8th grade. And so I was just like, man, I have to be like him. So once I got into high school, or going into high school, I decided to trim down a little bit. And what I knew how to do was just like walk on a treadmill and stuff. And I reduced, basically ate half as much as I did as I normally would. and I eventually got to a 32-inch waist within 2 months. And that kind of gave me a confidence, like a self-motivating and also self-confidence of, man, I could do whatever I kind of put my mind into, and it came to the point where I eventually joined a sports team in high school, and I didn't like the sport. I joined swimming, and I sucked at it. Like, I literally started from ground zero, and I was like the slowest kid on the team. But eventually, like I said before, going through the grind, I put in the hours. I eventually got decent at it where I wasn't the slowest, but I wasn't also the fastest. So I'm like average. And I also became more confident about that thing as well. So just like the addiction of being better at something as soon as I put work towards, kind of, I don't know, like a feedback loop, basically a continuous feedback loop. And I've noticed once I stopped doing that, because there was a certain point where the swimming season would stop, I start feeling a little bit lethargic. And I was just like, I need to do something with my life that's active. Like, I have to keep on moving, because it's not just about constantly improving, like the mentality of constantly improving. It's actually like physically, I feel like crap. So that's where I started picking up the weights in the gym. And that's like the gyms are everywhere in the world, so I can't make an excuse to not do something. So that's how I basically chose to start going towards fitness and learning about nutrition and all that stuff.
I love hearing these stories because it sounds like it was a really good foundation for you, or preparatory for you, especially like coming back to what we said about David Goggins and having specific experiences from your past that have built your confidence. And so you already knew that you could get there. That no matter how hard it was, or if you were falling behind, you still had faith in yourself to make it happen because of your experience. Like, you could rely on that.
Yeah. I always think about the time when I first got on the treadmill and I was spending an hour on it. I remember how freaking long that hour was. So just walking, and it's so monotonous. And I remember to myself when I was back at a cadet, when I was writing like a 12-page paper and I was first starting it, I was like, I'm going to eventually get this done. So I'm just going to not be too stressed out about it, because I know I'm going to get this shit done. So let's just go with the flow and just at least start doing something. And eventually, of course, I've never like not finished a paper or anything. So it kind of, that definitely builds upon itself, just having this first shitty experiences, and then relying on that shitty experience and saying like, yeah, I've done this before. I've done something similar to this. So I know I could accomplish whatever goal I have.
I love too that you bring up monotony.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really easy to look at monotony like an enemy or a frustration, or it's too boring, or it's not worth it. But those are the things. I did an interview with a Navy SEAL, and he talked about some of the drills that they have to do that are incredibly tedious, that are just a small aspect or piece of what they have to do, like pulling their weapon and getting it on target, and then going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But it has like over and over and over and over. It's so tedious, but it has to be done with such a precision. And anytime that you really want to be excellent at something, there's an element of tedious or of boredom that you have to face in order to get to that space of excellence.
Yeah, I think sometimes the best thing to do is just keep on doing whatever you're doing. It just takes time. There's always a habit building thing you're not doing anything wrong. It literally takes time for it to get better. So I always keep that in mind with my YouTube channel. Like there are definitely days where it's like I'm putting all this work and I feel like I'm producing so much better content than a lot of these other people. Why am I not getting as popular as I should be? Like the expectation of should be that's kind of fucked up, where I shouldn't be thinking like that. But eventually, like, people notice it, where it's like, why do you only have 1,000 subscribers? Like, what are you doing? Like, how is this happening where you have such good content and yet no one's hearing you out? And that kind of puts me in perspective. It's like, well, at least someone appreciates it, like that makes me feel a lot better. Someone's realizing that even though like I'm consistently doing something monotonous and I'm working hard at it, it's kind of cool how some people realize that's happening, you know.
Yeah, to get that validation.
Yeah.
That you're doing something that's helpful
Yeah.
is definitely worthwhile. And it can help a lot of times when you get to that point of being like, I don't know, should I keep doing this? But it's always harder at the beginning too,
Yeah, it
right?
is.
And from people that I've heard of that talk about YouTube channels, a lot of times it feels like it's barely moving, and then all of a sudden something happens, and then
So,
you never know when things can change is my point.
I think a lot of success, I think when the general population thinks of success, that it's not one instance that happened to make someone super successful. It's a accumulation of everything that's happened in the past that built this up. And without me producing the first video, I would never have gotten the 100th video that would have, you know, produced something that's extremely big that has paid dividends, basically. And I also, like, I think a few months ago, where I used to share a lot with my personal Facebook page to basically bring in views and get my families and friends involved with my life and with the channel, but now I don't even rely on that anymore. You know, it's probably cool to like look back on it where I shared a post where it's like 2 years ago I wouldn't have gotten any views without sharing it on my Facebook, and now I am able to basically grab people's attention and provide people value without really like putting myself out there. And even though it's relatively small, I definitely still appreciate all the people who take the time to watch and comment any questions and basically give whatever advice they have on the channel.
It is really nice validation, isn't it?
Yeah. and it's like it just feels good. It's not like validating in the sense where it gives me purpose, but it like validates you, like in terms of just like you're doing something good for somebody else.
Yes.
You know, it's not like
that you're being helpful.
Yeah. You're just not doing it really for fame or anything. You're just kind of trying to be helpful.
Right.
Just help people out. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I get it. I'm the person that was like always getting on and looking to where my downloads for the podcast were, you know.
The analytics.
And then when I'm like, wait, I don't even know somebody that is there. That means that somebody shared it with somebody that shared it with or whatever to get to that location. And I don't know who it is that actually is listening to me there, you know, like, and I get all excited. And even the very first time that I put out an episode and I was like checking to see how many downloads I had, you know, and in the first day I had 13 downloads and I was like, I can't even name 13 people that would be listening or that even know that I have the podcast.
Yeah.
And it was very exciting to me.
Yeah, that's definitely the first time where my video, that vlog video that exploded, I was just like, what made this happen?
Yeah.
Like, why? Like, I still can't figure it out why that happened, besides putting the title U.S. Officer Life or something.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of interest. I mean, there's a lot I didn't know about the Academy. Obviously, from the interview, I had a lot of questions about it because I don't really, I mean, I know of the Academy, but I don't really know much of, or I didn't know much of what it was like. So there's curiosity for sure.
Yeah. I guess for the people who are listening right now, they should, if they're like high up there, you know, general colonel that's have relationships with the Academy, they should definitely market that a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because that's an opportunity that I never regret doing that, even though I may not agree with but some parts of the Air Force. I think joining the Academy and going through that whole process is definitely one of the best decisions I've made in my life.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a really great conversation. You have a lot of great feedback and advice, and I really appreciate having you on the show.
Well, thank you so much, and I feel humbled because the other guests they seem like superstars. So I feel like I'm like in a lower tier, and I'm just like, hey, it's me, Alex.
No. Okay. First of all, sometimes it's really helpful for somebody to see somebody that's just a few steps ahead instead of somebody who's crossed the finish line already.
Right.
It can be more motivational to talk to the person who's at mile marker 7, you know, instead of already finished the race.
Right.
And so there's a big value in that. And second of all, like there's a big value just in the way that you talk, because you are very honest and upfront and you don't try and sugarcoat things, which is really valuable as well, because there's a fair amount that people feel like they just need to sugarcoat.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why David Goggins, for example, is so amazing for who he is because he doesn't sugarcoat.
Yeah.
He's actually very against sugarcoating. Yeah. And so I think it's the same thing that makes you relatable, but you're still talking about concepts that are important and valuable, attainable, and that make sense to somebody who is in the grind. That's you.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the show.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and found a new mindset to help you excel. If you want more information on Alex, please visit www.tanfpodcast.com/ALEX.